Can you print shoes at home today that keep up with what Nike and Adidas sell for over $200? That's exactly what I wanted to find out. Because these expensive 3D printed shoes are mostly made of TPU, and TPU really isn't some exotic material. A lot of you already have it at home. So the idea is right there. Why not just print my own shoes? The shoe industry hasn't been experimenting with 3D printing since just yesterday. And there are solid reasons for that. The biggest one is money. With a printer, any design can be made starting at a quantity of 1. No expensive molds, no minimum orders, production happens wherever it's needed. That saves a huge cost in shipping and storage. And that storage problem is bigger than you might think. Every year, more than 24 billion pairs of shoes are produced. A significant share of them ends up in landfill, never worn, simply because they didn't sell. A printed shoe, on the other hand, ideally only exists once someone actually orders it. There's one more advantage that matters specifically for shoes. With 3D printing, you can tune the material properties at every single spot through the design. Soft and cushioning under the heel, firm and supportive at the edge. All in one print. With traditional manufacturing, that's far more complicated. So the industry has solid reasons to bet on 3D printing. But that still doesn't answer my question. Does it work at home? And two things decide that: your printer and your material. Let's look at both. Printing TPU at home isn't new. It's been working more or less well for a while now. What changed is the hardware, and 3 innovations are giving home shoe printing a real boost right now. And they make this interesting for you too, if you got the right printer sitting at home. First, direct drive extruders are standard today. Thanks to better mechanics and control, they feed even soft filament cleanly into the nozzle. Second, that brings higher reliability. Modern printers run for many hours, even days, without trouble. Third, and most important, as of last year, multi-material printing has gone mainstream. Machines like the Snapmaker U1, the Bambu H2D or the Prusa XL can support soft TPU with rigid filaments like PLA. At the same time, printers keep getting bigger, and together that lets you place the print freely in space, so you can cleanly print shoes above US men's size 7 too, which a standard build volume often can't handle. These 3 things together mean what was real tinkering 2 or 3 years ago just runs reliable today. The printers I use can print shoes without any trouble. So on the printer side, the requirements are covered. So let's look on the material now. Because alongside plain TPU, manufacturers keep developing new variants of filament. Copolymers like PEBA, check out my video on that if you don't know what it is, and especially self-foaming filaments give you more choice than ever. Some manufacturers even develop filaments designed specifically for printing shoes. One example is the Roamr filament by Siraya Tech. I have tested Siraya filaments before, and for this video I got this spool along with a few TPUs free of charge. I will show you in practice that Roamr really does perform better for shoes. But first, the hard facts. The Roamr filament is a hybrid. At its core a TPU, but one that foams up to different degrees depending on the nozzle temperature. It has a so-called foaming agent added in, which gets activated by the heat in the nozzle and creates tiny bubbles in the TPU. And this foaming is exactly the key to printing shoes that actually feel like shoes. At the same time, the filament was modified so that, similar to PEBA and unlike normal TPU, it has a much higher rebound rate. When you take a step, it absorbs the energy and springs back the way you would expect from a shoe. Depending on the print settings, you dial the properties in. Softer or firmer, denser or lighter. But a manufacturer can promise a lot, so I printed a few shoes to compare and tested them thoroughly. To spot wear as fast as possible, I deliberately picked a very minimalist barefoot shoe, the Onda. At around 13 hours of print time, it's relatively quick to print and made of only a few layers. The left shoe I printed in regular TPU at 85A shore hardness. The right one in Roamr at 250 degrees, which gives it a stiffness similar to 76A TPU. Thanks to Siraya's ready-made print profile, the print worked on the first try. And even before I put them on, one thing jumps out. The Roamr shoe doesn't just look better thanks to the foaming, more natural than the rubbery shine, it also feels far more like a real shoe, comfortable and flexible. And it's noticeably softer than the regular TPU print. That one feels stiff and honestly uncomfortable by comparison. I then wore both shoes every day. Same model, same route, same load, the only difference being the material. And after just a few days, I can see the material widening at the front surface. More clearly on the TPU than on the Roamr. And then, after a little over a week, the difference becomes obvious. The TPU has torn open at exactly that spot. The Roamr, same route, same load, is still holding like on day one. Remember the datasheet numbers? On paper, both were roughly equally strong, but in reality, the foam structure holds up better or the layers simply bond better. For home printing, that means use a material like Roamr or foaming TPU and you will get better results. By the way, if tests like this are your thing, drop a subscribe so you don't miss out the next one. Back to the shoes. But it wasn't even the most important takeaway from this test, because something else turned out to be almost more interesting than the material itself, the reaction of the people I met. If you don't want to be asked about your shoes constantly, you might want to reconsider printing your own. They were a conversation starter every single time. No matter what we were talking about, sooner or later, eyes drifted down to my shoes. And next to the question of how it works, one question came up most often. And it's a completely fair one. Is this even worth it? So let's do the honest math. What does a self-printed shoe really cost? A roll of standard TPU costs around $20 per kilogram. Roamr sits noticeably higher at about $70. Depending on the model, you need different amounts of material. A minimalist pair like the Onda only needs around 174 grams, a more elaborate one like the Veloform around 850 grams plus about 150 grams of PLA support material. On top of that comes the print time, around 21 hours for the Onda pair and almost 4 days for the Veloform. At 17 cents per kilowatt hour, that works out to a surprisingly small line item. About 35 cents for the Onda pair and a little over $2 for the Veloform pair. What really counts is the material costs. Bottom line, you land between about $4 for the Onda pair in a standard TPU and about $13 for the same pair in Roamr. A more elaborate model like the Veloform in Roamr, including support material, already runs you about $65. And that's before factoring in your time, failed prints and printer wear. When I look at it honestly, a self-printed pair gets expensive faster than I thought. Which leads to my next question, wouldn't a bought 3D printed shoe be the smarter choice? To answer exactly that, after testing my self-printed shoe, I also wore this pair, the Aero Pro by PollyFab, for several weeks. PollyFab provided these shoes free of charge for this video, but they could be interesting for you too. At just under $100, they are on the cheaper end for commercially printed shoes, and already pretty close to what a self-printed pair costs you. The quality is still better. No layer lines, just an even, smooth lattice structure. The shoes are more elaborately modeled than the Onda, so they are more comfortable, have more cushioning, and genuinely wear well. What surprised me, despite the open structure, the shoe stays fairly warm. With more movement, I even got a bit sweaty. On colder days, on the other hand, they weren't uncomfortably cold, but in rain, of course, your feet still gets wet. And talking of water, there's one advantage self-printed and bought 3D printed shoes share. You can wash them. They are made in one piece with no glue that wouldn't survive a washing machine. And that exact one material construction brings another advantage. In the end, they are far easier to recycle too. So the advantages of 3D printed shoes are clearly on the table. And yet, through testing, printing and wearing them, one thing became clear. Both my self-printed shoes and this one are missing something. The one thing that makes 3D printing special in the first place. I am talking about real customization. Because the strength of 3D printing isn't being cheaper or faster than other methods. It's making production at a quantity of one possible at the same cost as mass production. And that means 3D printed shoes only really make sense once they are adapted to your own feet. During the prep for this video, I printed several models myself. and only realized after hours of print time that the shoe didn't fit. And that's not the designer's fault. Human feet are extremely different, which is why you try on different shoes in a store. But with home printing, I can't try before I print. Ideally, I would scan my feet and the model would be adapted to it directly. That doesn't exist for home printing yet, but there's one company doing exactly that. It's a pioneer in 3D printed shoes, Zellerfeld from Hamburg. And no, not another sponsor. I am showing you them because for me, it's currently the best solution for 3D printed shoes. Zellerfeld doesn't see itself as a shoe manufacturer, but as a hub for designers. Anyone can upload their model and Zellerfeld handles printing and fulfillment. After you order, the shoe gets adapted to your foot. You set a few preferences and upload a photo of your feet next to a sheet of paper. And AI measures the rest. Your profile stays saved, so you can reorder the same shoe anytime, in a different color, for example. What really surprised me, at its core, Zellerfeld uses the same FDM technology your printer at home does. Filament melted down layer by layer, water-soluble support. The difference is in everything around it. Zellerfeld develops its own machine, its own slicer, and its own material. That's an industrial scale, but the basic idea is the same. Stefan from CNC Kitchen was there in person and documented it brilliantly. Definitely watch that video if you want to go deeper. I couldn't resist, by the way, and ordered a pair for myself. The downside? Zellerfeld's shoes come at a price. They start around $100 and standout models reach up to $300. And even though that's a serious amount of money for a pair of shoes, for me it's the prime example of where 3D printing actually makes sense for footwear. It's not the printing itself. It's a shoe made for your feet and nobody's else. For home printing, a quick solution like that doesn't exist yet, unfortunately. So is home printing worth it finally? Honestly, a replacement for buying shoes, in my opinion, no. You pay more on material, you pay with print time, and you pay in failed fits until a model works. And what you end up holding is a shoe in a standard size. The same one you could just buy, except you poured a heap of work and time into it. But printing shoes, like the whole of 3D printing, is fascinating as a hobby. And that's exactly why I'm sticking with it. You build an understanding of how a shoe works, and you can steer the material properties yourself through print settings and design, all right at home. It's not worth it as a replacement for buying shoes, but it's worth it as a playground. And if we ever get to the point where you can genuinely adapt shoes to your own feet at home, that for me is the breakthrough. If you know a solution for that today, drop it in the comments. I'll be staying on this topic, and if you haven't had enough of 3D printing yet, here's another video for you that fits right in.